All right. So we are going to get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's presentation, Navigating Microaggressions for DEI Professionals and Corporations. My name is Jason Lambert. I'm a lead consultant with CareerMentorNet.com. And I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't see the way the
Okay,
system is.
right.
I'm sorry, the way the system is set up, I can't,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dio.
And my name is Dio Akinlade. I am assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin Parkside, where I teach diversity as one of the courses I teach there. So welcome, everybody. And I'll take over from here, Jason. Okay. So this is an interactive workshop. Remain muted. I think automatically everybody's muted anyway. So we want to encourage you to participate in the chat. We want to make it as interactive as possible. And please save your questions until the end.
Yeah, and also per instructions from the facilitator of this conference, make sure that any questions that you have, that you add those to the Q&A tab, and any comments or when we ask for participation in this workshop, that you use the chat tab for that as well, to kind of just create those differently so we can know where to look for the questions and separate that from the activity that we do. Thank you.
Okay, so the outline for something, I don't know if any of you attended the session we had yesterday. It was looking at microaggressions, but we're looking at it more from the employee's point of view. Today, we're going to be looking at it more from the organization's point of view. So we're going to start by looking at what do we mean by microaggressions. We hear the word all the time. And what are the different types of microaggressions? And what are the implications in the workplace? And then we'll talk about strategies for reducing microaggressions. So microaggressions can be defined as commonplace, everyday verbal or behavioral indignities. They could be intentional or unintentional, but they communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults. So you can think of microaggressions as being on a continuum, with being very deliberate and conscious on one end of the spectrum, and then very subtle and unconscious on the other end of the spectrum. So the first one, there are three types. The first one, micro assault, is often conscious and explicit. It's more like your traditional old-fashioned overt racism. And it's characterized by verbal or non-verbal attack, and it's meant to hurt the intended victim. So it could include things like name calling, avoidant behavior, or purposeful discriminatory actions. The other two are often unconscious and less explicit, and sometimes very subtle. So the micro insults, these are communications that convey rudeness or insensitivity and demean a person's identity. They might occur unbeknownst to the perpetrator, but they clearly disparage the recipient. So for example, when my son first went to college, many people would compliment him and say that he spoke very well, he was very articulate, which on the surface is a compliment and it seems positive. But they didn't say the same thing to his friends that went to the same high school and spoke exactly the same way as he did, but happened to be white. So there's that underlying message that either he's articulate for a Black person, or Black people in general are not expected to be articulate or well-spoken. Micro-invalidation is also very subtle. These are communications that negate or nullify the psychological thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of the marginalized group. So someone who sees someone like me may say they don't see color, that is negating, my identity. So our next slide, we're going to look at some examples. I want to see if you can identify the type of microaggression. I don't know, many of you might have heard about this case. This was about 3 years ago, I think 2018. A Black Yale student was just taking a nap in one of the common areas in the graduate school at the college, and a white student called the police. So what type of microaggression do you think this is? Is this a micro assault, a micro insult, or a micro invalidation? If you can just type it in the text, please.
Yeah, and don't be concerned. Don't be afraid of getting the answer right or wrong. This is a learning opportunity for all of us, and we hear the term microaggression all the time. And even in the research, sometimes there's some overlap in what between the different distinctions because it really is based on that intent and the impact and how subtle the recipient perceives it to be. But if
Right.
you could just use the chat and type in what type of microaggression do you think that is? That micro, uh, is that a micro assault, micro insult, or micro invalidation?
So we have one, Nicoria says is micro assault, and you're right, it is micro assault. Calling the police unnecessarily, we've seen this in the news quite a few times this past few years. Name calling and the use of epithets, crossing the street or clutching a handbag if you see somebody of color approaching you. Offensive signs, posters, or other visual displays are examples of micro assaults. Now, the next one. So somebody tells this person that, oh, this is too hard for you, maybe you should do something else. So they're steering you away from certain projects or careers because they don't think you can handle it because of your identity group membership. So what type of microaggression is that? Micro assault, micro insult, and micro invalidation. Nobody's responding yet.
That's okay.
In the interest of time, I'll just go.
All right, drum roll, please. That's okay. Some of these are difficult, challenging.
Yeah, especially the more subtle ones. Yeah, this is a micro insult, an ascription of intelligence, calling somebody or making somebody feel like a second-class citizen. So maybe putting them at the towards the kitchen in a restaurant, in an undesirable location in a restaurant. Pathologizing cultural values, assumption of criminal status. These are all examples of micro insults.
That's right. Assuming that one culture is better than another. And what's so interesting about micro insults, especially in this case, is that the perpetrators might believe that they had good intentions, right? That they think that they're doing this person here a favor by letting them know this is too hard for you, right?
Exactly.
But making these assumptions based on their identity.
Exactly. And then the last one, asking somebody, who was born and bred in America, where are you from? Where are you really from? Is a form of micro invalidation, an alien in your own land. So you're sending a message that they don't really belong because of the identity group or the way they look or they belong to. Color blindness, like I mentioned earlier, is also an example. Myth of meritocracy, denial of discrimination. We've had an African-American president. There's no racism in America. So if you say something, people don't really believe you because they don't think it exists anymore.
Right. Yeah. And so, but we all know that just because we have a Black president, that does not eliminate the fact that racism is still alive well in America. And so that myth of meritocracy, thinking that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, is invalidating your experience and the barriers that we encounter, that you may encounter, or that we encounter because of the identity group to which we belong and how we're stigmatized by that.
Exactly. So the challenging thing about microaggressions, and this is why we wanted to focus on this, is that because it's so subtle, or it can be so subtle and vague, it might be difficult to identify, and as a result, it's difficult to address. So, for example, if you go to your boss and you tell your boss that somebody said you were very articulate or you spoke well, it might be difficult to convince them that the person did something wrong. Whereas if you went to your boss and you said somebody used a racial slur against you, then it's easier to identify that as an issue. They probably have policies in place, steps that they can take to address it. And quite often, these microaggressions are done innocently. The perpetrator doesn't know they're doing anything wrong. Like Jason mentioned, you might even think they're doing you a favor, steering you in a different direction because they don't think you can handle the job or the subject or the career that you've chosen. So they're difficult to identify, but it's important because they have a negative impact on the victims. Research shows that the accumulation of microaggressions can lead to health problems for the victim. In fact, it has been shown to be more psychologically damaging than direct forms of discrimination. And it has negative impacts on employees' relationships at work and their job outcomes. A study conducted by Sue and his colleagues found a whole series of impacts that microaggressions have on employees. Not only do they find it offensive, it negatively impacts their mood for the rest of the day. So you can imagine if it impacts your mood for the whole day, you can imagine the impact it has on your productivity, on your job outcomes. It can negatively impact your well-being. It causes people to question how their colleagues view them. So it can lead to feelings of lack of self-esteem, self-efficacy can affect those traits. It can negatively impact relationships that people have with their co-workers. And if you're in a company, you're trying to get people to work together, then this is not a positive thing for you. It decreases overall job satisfaction, causes them to be less productive at work. Even though these figures for the productivity at work are kind of low compared to the other impact, I think it might actually be higher in reality, but maybe the people don't realize how much it's impacting their productivity. I mean, somebody who's in maybe a bad mood because somebody said something the whole day, and they're relating to customers, etc., it might actually affect their job performance, and they may not realize. And then finally, it makes people think about leaving, so it affects retention. The other thing I wanted to point out about this table is that when you look at the micro invalidations, which are the very subtle forms of microaggressions, the impact it has on people is just as bad as the impact it has on the more obvious micro assaults. In some cases, it's even more. So it's really important that organizations have something in place, strategies to be able to deal with these microaggressions. And Jason is going to talk about the strategies organizations can use to address them.
Thank you, Dayo. So we've discussed microaggressions. We've defined it. We've learned how to identify the different types of microaggressions. And also we've discussed its impact, not only on employees individually, but how it can impact the organization and its culture overall. So what we want to do now is present to you a framework that we call Step In, that's based on some of the current research that looks at microaggressions, tips from not only researchers, but also thought leaders and other experts in this field. And so Step In stands for S, which is for giving it serious attention. And we're going to talk about why that matters. It also, T stands for training, the type of training that's needed. E is for engage. P, you want to promote value differences in the workplace to help mitigate these microaggressions from occurring. I is to inform, and then N is to normalize. And we're going to do a deep dive into each of these to tell you what the full meaning of these letters in the acronym mean. So the first was serious attention. You want to give it serious attention because of the fact that microaggressions are often subtle and sometimes hard to identify. They become ignored by leadership. Employees may not report them, but it's important not to underestimate it. This what's called a death by 1,000 cuts, and so you want to give it serious attention. If you notice microaggressions occurring in the workplace, or if you have an employee that comes to you with a complaint about someone uh, about their experience with microaggressions at work. So that's the very first step. It is a serious matter and should not be overlooked or swept under the rug. Secondly, you want to make sure that you have training specific to microaggressions as a part of your DEI training in your organization. And so typically you want to have regular intervals of training, at least at a minimum annually. But what we see in a lot of organizations is that their diversity trainings might be very surface level, not recognizing that the field of diversity, equity, inclusion has a very broad umbrella with a lot of different aspects to it. And so you want to make sure that microaggressions is one of training this specifically addressed, just like the one we're doing here, because of the fact that many perpetrators don't even realize that they're exhibiting microaggressions, and also many leaders. Um, it's challenging for them to sometimes recognize them. Doing things like having role playing activities based on the different types of microaggressions, like micro insults, or reviewing cases. It's a good way for people to better understand microaggressions. There's an organization called skillgym.com that right now has a beta website right now where there are videos where you can actually interact with different people as leaders to practice your conversational style. And there's one on there that addresses, we're going to talk about a case taken from Skill Gym where a person experienced a microaggression at work. But Skill Gym is real good. It's beta right now. It's beta testing. So there are a few glitches, but it's free right now to sign up. They're looking for leaders to test out their website. And it's a good opportunity to do that and practice these role playing activities. And next, you want to engage. And what we mean by engage is engage not only the victims of microaggressions, but the perpetrators as well. And we engage by addressing microaggressions by using what's known as micro inclusions or micro affirmations. So, micro inclusions are a way to create a safe space for everyone to feel safe and supported by just in general creating a norm of people not calling each other by their own names and not pet names or nicknames, because sometimes nicknames can be offensive and sometimes they're loaded with gender, where women might be called names at work like, kitten or cat or whistle calling or all types of different things that become it slippery slope that happens where people then begin to think it's okay to call people nicknames based on how they perceive that person to be and not how that person perceives themselves to be. Things such as a no touching policy should also be in place. These are examples of how you create safe spaces so that all of your employees are on the same page regarding knowing what's acceptable in this work culture. And then micro affirmations are also a way to create a safe space to ensure equal contribution. An example of this would be, let's say that Jane has a great idea that she presents at a meeting, and then Jim repeats her idea, and then others begin to affirm Jim's idea and applaud him for it. If you notice this as a leader, a good way to exhibit a micro affirmation is to say, "Well, Jim, I like that idea. It sounds a lot like what Jane said," or "I appreciate you, adding on to what Jane contributed. Does anyone else have some ideas they want to share us that we can add on to what Jane just mentioned?" And so you're able to then now bring back the credit to Jane so that she feels included, and also put James on notice in a way that's not too threatening, that he exhibited a microaggression towards Jane by taking credit for her idea. Uh, and then for different things like micro assaults and micro insults, you want to address the microaggressions directly. Don't be afraid to address it and call it what it is, and be able to educate the perpetrator and then confirm the viewpoints of the person who's experienced the microaggression. Next is promoting valuing difference, because even though you want to address these microaggressions as they occur, it makes your job a lot easier to do that when the organization is already emphasizing diversity, equity, inclusion, just like you would in the other functional areas. So, support with resource, support with training, making sure that there's the topic for DEI is always on the agenda, and simple things like acknowledging holidays and heritage months so that you can celebrate and value all the differences of your employees. And then inform, publicize the activities that you have, not only within the organization, but externally as well. And because people learn and absorb information in different ways, even though you have trainings and you talk about DEI in your agendas, and you create a safe space by addressing microaggressions and using micro affirmations, um, having literature on microaggressions and also just topics surrounding DEI in general and other information is useful to have sitting around the organization so that people on their own time can pick it up, look at it in a way that they feel that's non-threatening. And then you want to normalize this new culture, codify it into place, so that you can help still mitigate the microaggressions and decrease the likelihood of them occurring. Many public organizations, public institutions have known as an ombudsperson, someone where employees can issue complaints in a confidential way, so that they can be addressed by the organization. We're seeing more of this also in the private sector, and that's also a good way to make sure that you're keeping a tally of the microaggressions that occur in your organization, and also it's a way for people to express what's going on, since you can follow up as well. And then management by walking around. Research has shown is a great way for leaders to mitigate microaggressions as well. And this is because when you walk around often around your organization, you are able to easily pick up on and identify those subtle differences in the interactions between your employees. And so you can kind of intervene before it erupts into something that's more damaging to your employees or the victim of the microaggression in your organization. So now you're able to, as a manager, address it before it becomes something that's even more explicit or overt. And also give more attention to train your leadership to be more attentive in that way with training such as this. Ask them to walk around, get to know their employees better, so then they can also be able to have conversations with employees and better understand how they feel, how they perceive the culture of the organization. Because, like Mary Frances Winters says, who's a noted author in this DEI space, that empathy is not possible if I don't know you, right? And empathy is really the backbone for change when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, changing culture. Other tips, such as anonymous 360-degree feedback, are very helpful, so that as leaders, we can understand in our evaluations how our those who report to us, how they view us. And also it's an opportunity for maybe perpetrators of microaggressions to realize that some of their employees don't really some of their employees feel victimized by them because of the way that they interact with them as well. Because as we said before, they may not realize it, they may not know it. And an anonymous conversation box is also a great way to collect data, get a pulse of what's going on in your organization. Because again, microaggressions are very challenging to identify and observe. They can happen quickly sometimes, but if you have a system where your employees can report it in an anonymous way, then at least you can track what microaggressions are occurring in your organization so that you can address it if you have to. So what we have, uh, what we're going to do today is, and we encourage you to participate using the chat. We want you to read this case. This is adapted from skillgym.com. And we want to ask you to answer the following questions on this case. The first question is, what type of microaggression do you think this is? The second one is, how would you address it? And then third, how would you mitigate to ensure it does not happen again based on what you've learned today? So we're going to give you a chance to read this case, this short case. Shouldn't take you no longer than 3 minutes. We'll check in then, and if you could use the chat to then answer this first question of what type of microaggression do you think this is? And I'll give you a clue. There could be, if this is the case that we use, yes, there could be more than one microaggression here in this case as well. And as a reminder, those microaggression types are micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. Oh yeah, and Dio, just as a reminder, all I can see is the presentation. So
Yes, yes.
yeah, I just want to make sure that we're
Okay.
looking at the chat and the Q&A in case somebody had a question to address too.
Yes, I'm monitoring both of them.
Okay. All right.
So we have Nicoria says micro insults, black and not equipped for the job.
Ah, I see. So microaggression, micro insult, black and not equipped for the job. All right. What else? Anyone else want to share?
That's a good
And
one.
then if we get a few responses, then we'll let you know we'll reveal the answer. And like I said, it's okay if you get it wrong. This is the place to learn.
And Anthony says micro insults and micro invalidation.
Ah, micro insult and micro invalidation. Okay. All right. Anyone else want to share what type of microaggression do you think this is?
So Nicoria kind of, I think she elaborated on her answer. She says microaggression, cutting off, speaking, and ignoring.
Yes. Cutting off, speaking, and ignoring. That's right. And so, is there anyone else, Dio, or should I reveal the answer for this question?
Anybody else going once, twice? Go ahead.
All right. So the type of microaggression, based on what we see here, is that the ignoring and undervaluing contributions, that could be considered a micro invalidation or micro insult. It kind of be on that thin line between the two of those. But when we get to the idea that there's discussions that they believe that she's not equipped for the task because she's black, and that could be because they either think she's an affirmative action hire or just because they perceive her racial identity to be inferior. Now we're getting into that micro assault territory because this is intentional, it's overt. They've expressed their viewpoint that they believe that she was hired because she was black and not equipped for the task. And so now there's no question that they have a specific attitude explicit that they have towards Maya. And so those are the two types of microaggressions that we see there, that micro assault and also that micro insult that also at the same time invalidates her contributions. Okay. So how would you address it? What are some ways you would address it? Think about the step-in model and what we talked about. She comes to ask for your support. What might be some things that you do?
Nicoria says advocate for her when in the room where she might get cut off. So yeah, advocate for her while she's talking.
Yes, awesome. So one of those micro affirmations or micro inclusions. Exactly. That's a great way to address it. And that would also be a way how you mitigate it doesn't happen again, right?
Yeah.
Um, is there anything else in the chat, Dio?
Nope.
Okay.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Nikira just posted challenge and call out when people are talking about her negatively. So
yes.
challenge and call out. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Challenge and call out when people are acting negatively.
Yes.
And to touch on that some more, research shows that a good way to do that is to always call out the microaggressor so that you don't draw too much attention to the victim of the
Mm.
microaggression as well, because they already feel like they're uncomfortable. But you do want to call it out, keep it short and simple, and then you can also follow up after the meeting if you're there and you witness it occurring during the meeting. So you include Maya with that micro affirmation, micro inclusion, and then you call it out, and then you follow up. And part of the follow up is when you address microaggressions directly is educate the perpetrator about the microaggression, because that individual may not have even known that they exhibited a microaggression. And it's important to let them know the impact, because sometimes they might respond, well, I didn't know, as if it doesn't matter, but it does matter, because it doesn't matter if they had good intentions. The impact is still the same for the recipient of the microaggression. And then express the importance of apologizing. Tell the perpetrator, hey, you need to apologize, and here's why. Um, and follow up with Maya to make sure that she's okay. Let her know what you've done. But it's important that if you do this, that you have that training that's occurring in your organization as the foundation. Otherwise, the perpetrator of the microaggression, not to say that they don't deserve any blame for their actions, but at the same time, because microaggressions, the perpetrators may not realize they've done it. You want to have that training so that it at least gives them an opportunity to improve their behavior and understand why that they're being called out for the microaggression as well. So we're hoping that you at least learn one thing from today's presentation that you did not know before, and that you kind of can take some information, some takeaways from our step in model. And so we're curious to know, was there anything surprising that you learned today? Or this is also a great opportunity if you have any questions for us as well. So maybe some things that we did not cover, that some questions that you need answered.
Anthony has a question. He says, do you incorporate practices in policy to affirm this model?
Do we incorporate policies and
Practices in policy. Do you incorporate practices in policy to affirm this model?
yes. So yes, you can. If so, you can like maybe do performance improvement evaluations. The evaluations, we could talk about their behavior as leaders. We did mention, for example, 360-degree feedback is something that can be used as part of someone's evaluation process to determine if they're being like a good citizen in the organization, if they really understand the culture that you're trying to create in your organization. And once as part of your evaluation process, for example, a 360-degree feedback to see how what people think about that individual. And maybe you have in your anonymous conversation box, someone's name is mentioned multiple times, then that could be a conversation that you can have to begin putting them on a performance improvement plan as it relates to their interpersonal reaction with employees. Because not only is our productivity and the task that we do and our role important, but it's also important for us to create a safe space for everyone at work as well. And you want employees to be a part of that. And there's a thing known as healthy turnover, where if organization wants to achieve a certain type of culture, then yes, it's okay that some people either have to be let go if they are not able to come on board with these new policies that address microaggressions. And also, you have some people that might just leave on their if they're on their own volition. But the great thing is that when you begin to attract new employees and recruit, you can put in place things to to ensure that you're attracting employees that now have values that align with the organization's values to replace those other employees that did not. And so that means that in your application process and your interviews, you can ask them about what's their experience with diversity, equity, inclusion, or give them some behavioral interview questions about experiences they've had working in the DEI space, or what they would do if they were placed in a certain situation, or if they observed a microaggression occurring. And that could be part of your selection process and who you want as your next employees. And here's some resources here for you listed as well. Some that you could find on our website, and some other useful resources that talk about DEI for leaders and how leaders can improve diversity and enact diversity climate change in the organization. Are there any more? Did I answer that question? I hope I did. The short answer is yes. And I hope I gave you some examples of how you do that.
Yes, he says, I am totally on board with these comments. I know that the local school district employees deal with the scenarios you mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? So someone is asking to join the moderation panel. Let me see. Joseph, I think someone wants to, that means usually someone wants to speak or has a question or a comment.
Okay.
So just added Joseph. Let's see. Okay, so I guess I don't know what happened to Joseph. He was here, but not anymore. Any more questions? All right. Well, it looks like we're out of time. We're scheduled for 40 minutes, I think. So if there are no more questions, we thank you for attending. Right?
Thank you very much for attending.
And enjoy the rest of your day. Please feel free to contact us at careermentornet.com if you want to follow up with us or you want more information. We not only do lectures and workshops, but we also do what's known as diversity climate change consulting. So we can come into your organization and introduce diversity activities and programs from start to finish for you. Enjoy your day and the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.